welcome everybody back for, it's been 3 months since we've seen you last. No, it's been more than that because we had to cancel last time, if you remember, because of the parking lot. I would like to recognize one more key person. Roseanne mentioned the very successful Norfolk annual reunion. Mike, put your hand up. We all know Mike. Mike Bagara is also a board member. So we've got 3 board members, the president and 2 board of director members, and Mike is the spark plug for the reunion. So when you're thinking about next year's reunion, be thinking about Mike. He's the guy into it. Good, Mike. I'd like to introduce a gentleman, Bob. Say it again.
Melmy.
Bob Melmy. Bob Melmy is he's with the Hingham, Massachusetts Historical Board or Commission, right? And Bob has agreed to join with us here to talk about his town. I've never personally been to Hingham, but I'm going to go. But in my reading about Hingham, it's quite a place. But we have the resident expert right here, who, so if you got any questions about this, the great town of Hingham. We're going to be talking about the Bethlehem Hingham Shipyard. Here's the town of Hingham, Massachusetts. Right, founded in 1635. It was for religious freedom. They were breaking away from the Church of England, and they came here and they founded this small town. The population in 1681, just 140 families. And the early settlers were fishermen, farmers, sailors, coopers, barrel makers, and bucket makers. That's a kind of a funny term. But and millers. What a bucket maker. Hingham, believe it or not, gained an incredible reputation for building buckets, which were very important in the old days of sailing. And Hingham, on the bottom of their buckets, from Hingham, Massachusetts. So around the world, sailors brought the name of Hingham, Massachusetts to the world. And because on the bottom it was, so Hingham was called Bucket Town. Bucket Town. So anyway, what I'm showing you here is the population as it slowly evolved. During the Revolutionary War, approximately 2,000. Civil War, approximately 4,000. Right after the First World War, 5,600. Right before the Second World War, 8,000. Now let me stop right there, because something happened. Of course, we all know the Second World War happened. Jump forward, these are the census data. Jump forward to the next decade, 1950, 10,700, and on up to today, the last census was 24,000. However, there was a great jump between 1940 and 1950, and then a fall back, and I'll show you why. In World War I and World War II, there were naval magazine ammunition depots employing approximately 2,400 people, totally separate from any shipyard. Whereas Dave mentioned that when his ship came in on its way to Boston Navy Yard, they had to offload all their ammunition, and it was done here in Hingham. That's how, and then they would pick their ammunition up on the way out, which was common around the country. Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, you stopped at a place called, I forget the name of it now, but it was Fort Muston, I think it was called, but it was a place where you put all your ammunition and you pull it out when you leave the shipyard. World War II is what we're going to be talking about primarily here. That's when the Bethlehem Hingham Shipyard became the shipyard. This is what it looked like before the shipyard. One of the things I want to point out is, remember this little hook of land right here. Just keep that in your mind, that little as a geographical mark. There were a couple, maybe Bob, if you can tell. I'm not sure what these little buildings were, but there were a few of them around. But this is before the shipyard.
Some are restaurants and.
Restaurants and
Things like
okay.
that.
There was an airport.
There was also an airport there for
An
a few
airport,
years
yeah.
before.
Okay, airport there, yeah. Oh, in fact, I was wondering what that, was it out here? maybe?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
airport.
Yeah. Okay, well, why would you choose a small town like Hingham to build a shipyard? First of all, it was 150 acres of barren scrub land with a few houses and restaurants and things. But it had a deep water access, and that's important. It also had an existing railroad line coming through it. Close to an airport, near existing Navy properties, the two magazines, there was a magazine plus an annex that were on either side of the town. So the Navy presence was there in the first place. But most importantly, it was only 3 miles from Quincy and Bethlehem's Four River Shipyard, major shipyard that had been in existence for a long time. So that's why it was a good idea to build there. Pearl Harbor got us on December 7th, 1941, and literally within weeks, the Navy had said, build a shipyard. And for the next, on into early 1942, this is what was done. All that 150 acres of scrub land was cleared. They built a 1/3 of a mile long steel plant, steel mill they called it, purported to be the largest building at the time ever in the world. They built 16 massive timber and steel building ways. If you'll notice over here, the two, Bob was nice enough to bring these 2 photographs of the shipyard, and you'll I have some here too, but you'll see what he means. The photograph on the right on the easel has the 16 building ways at the bottom, and at the top is 8 fitting out piers. And each one of those building ways was served by 2 traveling cranes, which meant you had 16 cranes also. And they built a steam, pneumatic, and electrical generating plant that didn't exist. All of a sudden, within 3 to 6 months, all this was built. The other thing is the accommodation barracks. You'll see in a second here how many employees we had. This is what it looks like after, and this is that peak production. Here are the building ways that are shown on that down there too, and these are the fitting out. Here is the 1/3 of a mile long. You don't even see the end of it. Actually, the photograph, it travels out here. This is the steel plant. We know this is late 1945 or late 44 or early 45 because all the ships in the building ways are LSTs at that point. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that's just a clue of when this happened. Remember I asked you to remember that little spit of land? That's it there, so you can mentally orient yourself here where we are.
That building at that time was the largest building in the world,
Right, that's what,
before the Pentagon was built.
yeah, I know, it was a massive thing. And it looks small, not that it looks small, but it looks, I'm not sure what the height of it was, but if you can see, this is a crane, and that crane is below the level of the, so it's, I don't know how many how many feet it was up, but geez.
40,
Monsters.
50, something like that.
Sure, yeah. Biggest in the world, yeah. Okay, let's go to 1942. 1942, we went from 0 employees to 15,000 employees just in 1942. And who are these people? Of course, we're now at war with Japan and Germany. The Selective Service is drawing people in throughout the country, and there's no way that you want to take some young kid in who's draft eligible, because you're going to lose him in 3 months. After you train him, you lose him. So the vast majority of the employees were men who were physically ineligible for the draft, 4F. 4F guys. Oh, men who were too old for the draft. We would do well in the shipyard, I think. And this is a key. Teenagers too young for the draft. 16-year-old boys working in the shipyard. plus over 2,700 women, because there still were not enough. 2,700 women, Rosie the Riveters, were also employed. Nobody knew how to build a ship. So where do you get them from? 3 miles away is a big booming shipyard, had been there since the turn of the century. So they brought 400 experienced, skilled supervisors and shipbuilders, brought them from Fore River, 3 miles to the brand new shipyard, and they then started training this massive number of 15,000 employees. Now we talked about Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah, look at that. You gotta get protection.
This is what I, if you, can you look, I'll look at this one. 3 young ladies are chipping on a deck. And take a look in the back, I counted 6 guys, all loafing, watching the girls work. So, Rosie the Riveters. And just to put it all in perspective, throughout the time, the 3.5 years of the Hingham Shipyard, approximately 12 to 15% of the workforce was female. So if you're wondering how, Rosie the Riveter got an awful lot of press, but how many are we talking? And that was pretty true in throughout the shipbuilding industry in the United States. Okay, Kilroy was here. Jump sideways. You remember those of you? Kilroy, this little scrawl was found all over the world. There's a story about Stalin, Joseph Stalin at the Potsdam conference or whatever, one of those conferences. He walked into the VIP men's room, and right next to the head was somebody had scrawled, Kilroy was here. He turned to his, now this is Stalin now, he turned to his flunky and said, find the person who did that and shoot him. So, but it was everywhere. So what was Kilroy? Well, Kilroy was ubiquitous. It was all over the Second World War. In 1946, a newspaper decided to find out who this Kilroy was. And there was a great survey. It's pretty well accepted now. It was a man originally from Boston who worked for the Fore River Shipyard and or the Hingham Shipyard, a guy named James Kilroy. And what his job was to go around, since they paid the riveters per rivet, right? He would go around and he would mark that this is an okay rivet. Well, what the riveters would do, they would erase the okay mark and he'd come back around, so they get paid twice for the same rivet. So in order to do that, he made it very difficult to, so Kilroy was here, and supposedly, that's why I use the term perhaps. Yeah, it's disputed by many people about who Kilroy really was. Anyway, that's just a side. 1942, we'll stay with 1942. The first destroyer escort was laid down in June, at the end of June in 42. You gotta remember now, there was no shipyard. There was no shipyard January 1st of 42. We're now laying a keel for a destroyer escort 6.5, almost 7 months later. It was a British ship. It was a British ship. Believe it or not, it was actually the second one that was planned, but they decided to build it first, to lay it down first for political reasons, to show the Brits that we were all in it with them. Because the Buckley class of a destroyer escort, it was, the Brits called it, it's the same ship, Brits called it the Captain class frigate. Okay, in 1942, they laid down 9 more destroyer escorts of the Buckley class and the Captain class ships. 7 of them were U.S. Navy destroyer escorts, and only 2 more were Royal Navy frigates. Remember what was happening. This is a time when you're still building the shipyard and building a shipbuilding force. This is next key here. 40 LCIs. An LCI, I've got a picture of it in a minute here. An LCI is a 158-foot long ship, and it's a landing craft, but it's absolutely simple. So what I'm saying here at the bottom, 1942 was a steep learning curve year. During 1942, they only built 10 destroyer escorts, but they built 40 of these little LCIs. And it's clearly, to me, it's clear what they were using them for. Teaching them basic electrical systems, basic engines aboard this little landing craft, and welding. Welding, that was the key. So 1942 was a really learning curve for the shipyard. Give you an idea of what they look like. The HMS Cosby was one of the destroyer escorts that we produced for the Brits. They called them frigates. And here's the Buckley so they're the same ship. The Brits eventually, when they got them to England, they made some modifications as they would expect them to because of technology and or equipment. Here I talked about that landing craft infantry. Every single one of them, that's why the British flag is there. Every single one of them went to the Brits, 40 of them on Lend-Lease. None of the Hingham built LCILs, that means landing craft infantry large, none of them went to the US, even though many were built throughout the country. That's what they look like. And that's what this is not a Hingham built LCI, but they had ramps, one on either side. You're just seeing on the port side here. Did not have a bow door opening. Carried 200 troops as opposed to an LST, for example, that would cover many more. 923 landing craft infantry were produced. 40 of them were built in Hingham for the Brits. All right, what's Lend-Lease mean? It's a long story, Lend-Lease. It originally started before the war when we provided 50 old World War I vintage four-pipers to the Brits. And it was a very difficult diplomatic and political problem because the country was isolationist. We did not want to get involved in the European war. And so I think you all know the background to it. But once it started, we jumped into it with both feet. What you're seeing here is 2 Royal Navy Captain-class frigates in the summer of '43. This is 43 is we were finally up and really running. I just picked this picture out. It's the Bullen on the left and the HMS Byron on the right, being built side by side. Bullen was sunk by a year later by Nazi U-boats. But it wasn't just Lend-Lease. As you can see, we've got the USS Calder being built, and the USS Foss, HMS Calder being built, and the USS Foss. So we're side by side. It's interesting to look at the construction of the yard itself. There are two slips, not slips. There are 2 building ways here, side by side. The beam of a destroyer escort is 37 feet, and you can see they're jammed in tight. The only thing between them is this little structure here. They're served by they put a lot of thought into this shipyard. The 2 cranes here can reach either one. So if you've got a heavy load, you can use the crane on either side of the 2 ships to lift the heavy load. But there's a basic structure, which was probably structural steel, but everything, most of what you actually see here is wood. It was a huge wooden edifice that they built. And they're competing, and this is, having worked in a shipyard, if you got another ship in there, you're competing like crazy for the shipyard assets. Here's a look at one of the ships being launched. 1943, Amesbury, DE-66. OSHA would go crazy looking at this picture. Not a hard hat here. The only hard hat is this man right here. I blew this picture up and looked at it. He's got a welder's helmet on, and the visor is up. He's the guy who cut the last piece, and so this guy right here with his hands on his hips, he just cut through the one piece that was holding that ship, and then as it's starting to go, he raises his thing to but there's not a hard hat anywhere, you know. And there are guys up here hanging in the rafters. So, it was a different world, my father's world. Okay, 43. Remember we said there were 15,000 employees in 1942. 23,500 when they were fully up and running in 43. Working around the clock, 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. 7 days a week. This is, where do you put 23,000? You remember we looked at the population of Hingham. Where do you put these 23,000 young and old men and boys? Where do you put them? They built dormitory style, they call them barracks blocks. They did not build mess halls and kitchens for them, however. They gave them a victualling allowance, they called it. $1.50 a day. And they were expected to go feed themselves on $1.50 a day. And I'm thinking, you can't even get a Dunkin' Donuts for $1.50. But you got 3 full meals in town. I read a comment from an old fellow online who was one of these. He said, some of us didn't spend it on food. So.
Yeah, there was a USO recreational facility in downtown Hingham, and many of the British sailors and American sailors spent a lot of time in that building. Yeah. And a lot of them ended up some of them British sailors ended up staying in Hingham and coming back after Hingham after the war and getting married and staying. So.
It'd be interesting to know how many of them met their wives in the shipyard. Yeah. Excuse me just a second. And throughout the rest of the time with the experienced employees from Four River Ship, they continued on there. They didn't just do the training and run. They stayed. During 1943, which was the peak for the destroyer escorts, 70 more. Remember, in 1942, there were only 10. The half of 1942. 70 more. 42 of them to the Royal Navy and 28 of them to the U.S. Navy. And then during 1943, many of the ships were commissioned early in 43 and in 1942. By this time, by the middle of the 1943, the Navy started converting them into high-speed transports. Now, what happened in the middle of 1943? We finally closed the Mid-Atlantic Gap, anti-submarine warfare. We finally closed it with escort carriers and hunter-killer groups and the 4-engine B-24, Navy version B-24. We finally were able to kill the Nazi U-boat problem. So, as we're getting to 1943, we're killing more U-boats than they could make. All of a sudden, the Navy said, oh my God, we're in high gear producing destroyer escorts. We need, in the Pacific, we need high-speed transport. So, I'll show you the difference in a minute, for those of you who don't know what that is. But many of the early Hingham destroyer escorts were converted in yards elsewhere, not in Hingham. But at the same time, Hingham began to lay down, in 44, all the ones laid down by Hingham in 44 were the high-speed transport version from scratch, from the beginning. All right, this is a key here. She became a huge LST builder in 1944 and 45. Wow. You see, 95 LSTs were built in Hingham just in those last 2 years. All right, what are we talking about? There are 2 classes of ships built of destroyer escorts. Of course, we're tin can sailors, so let's talk about the tin cans. This is the Buckley class. This is USS Lawrence, DE-53. And this is the Rudder Row class. The only difference, both ships had the same hull design. Both ships had the same propulsion, steam-driven, but not the way a lot of us are familiar with geared turbine. What they had were steam. The steam would drive the generator would drive a motor would drive the propeller. So they were turbo-electric, let me put it that way. The only difference between those 2 classes of ships, the Buckley and the Rudder Row, were the guns. You can see the Buckley class had 3 3-inch guns. That's 40 millimeter. three 3-inch guns, and the Rudder, same ship, same design, had two 5-inch guns. All right. I talked about APDs. Here is the USS Gantner. I chose that for a personal reason. My daughter's father-in-law, rest in peace, was the commanding officer of Gantner during the war. His name was Bob Bevere, and he was reputed to be the youngest. He took command of this ship at age 25. Yeah, at 25 years old, he was in command. What they did when they converted him, this is a Hingham-built ship. They converted into APD, and they did it down in Charleston. The Charleston Navy Yard did it. What they did is they took out the after gun. They installed two Welland davits, port and starboard, two boats in each one. So what you had, and it carried 200 troops. This is the ship, and if you'll notice, it's got, if this were a color picture, this is brown and green, not gray. They're camouflaging because they got in close to the coast. They would drop off the UDT, the frogmen, to go in and prepare a beach. That was their job. And that's why they had only 4 boats. This crane in the back was for all the equipment for the frogmen, the UDT, the pre-seals, the people that preceded the seals. This crane here, which was added, was a way you put the boat in the water, you put your mortar or your pack howitzer or whatever it is into the boat. So anyway, that's what an APD looks like. Same ship, but what they did with the Hingham 3-inch guys, part of the conversion was a single 5-inch mount instead of the two 3-inch mounts. Okay, these are the Rudder. Now, let me go back here. This is a Buckley class. The Buckley class, when they converted them, they became part of the Charles Lawrence class, which was named after the first ship that was converted that way. Here are the Rudder, the second of the Hingham classes. The Rudder classes, they converted them the same way. The original Rudder, if you remember, had two 5-inch guns, one forward, one aft. So what they did, they just took off the existing 5-inch. Remember the other one, they had to add the 5-inch in place of the 3. So they took off, but the arrangement of the ship was exactly the same for both classes when they finally got the APDs in. All right, LSTs. Remember we talked about 1944 and 45 LSTs. Hingham built 95 of them. I think it was 95. Here is one example. This is LST 935. Hingham built. You see it was launched on the 5th of August, 44. Commissioned just, 24 days later. From launching to commissioning. It was sold for scrap. This thing, look at this. Keel was laid in 44. 2 years later, they're cutting it up.
Oh, that's crazy.
And 57 days from the keel laying to commissioning. And this by far was not the record. This was not the record. It was kind of common at that point. Because that shipyard and their employees, they were really, they were on a roll. They were really pumping them out. And this one was commissioned in enough time to get to the Pacific and take part in three invasions, which covered 2 different battle stars. But you can see it was, here and gone, 935. By the way, never named. We didn't start naming LSTs, the counties. We didn't start naming them until after the Korean War. I want to tell you about 2 that I had experience with. These 2, remember the other one I just showed you was 935. This is 938. This was built three ways down from the one we just saw that was scrapped so quickly. This one, eventually 9 LSTs were turned over to the South Vietnamese Navy and continued to sail with South Vietnamese Navy. When Vietnam fell in 1975, we had 32 ships that escaped. in our group. We took them to the Subic. The LST 975, this one right here, became the Marion County. It was turned over to the Vietnamese. They ended up calling it the Cam Ranh, named after the town of Cam Ranh. And its hull number, in Vietnamese service, this would say 500. 500. So 975 escaped. They made it to Vietnam. 938, which became the Vietnamese ship 501, the Da Nang, named after the city of Da Nang, they were captured. The North Vietnamese army captured the ship. So they continued to sail long after they were built. I want to show you, this is not a Hingham-built ship. This was built somebody else. But I want to show you, this is a ship that had 5,000 refugees aboard. And we had a guy in the Kirk Association who sat down, blew this picture up, and started counting them. Started counting the heads. He says, there aren't 5,000 people there. I said, yeah, but that's what you can see down below in the well deck. And any of you have been aboard an LST, you know how big the well deck of an LST is. Full of people. So the estimate was 5,000. And this is the 505 was the Jerome County. They did escape. This ship then became, was turned over to the Philippine Navy. Once they, if you'll notice, there are 2 helicopters aboard too. Got 2 helicopters, a crane, all these people. The only thing that bothered me, some little aside here, the only thing that really bothered me, I was on the USS Kirk, and our motor whaleboat and our captain's gig, we just beat the hell out of it for the whole transit. They had 2 perfectly good LCVPs. They never launched them one time, and that really frosted me. Never launched them at all, and they were both operable. All right, Hingham Shipyard. What's the scoreboard? From 1941, when I say 1941, it was the last 3 weeks of 1941, from Pearl Harbor to the end of 41. So from 41 to 45, built 227 ships. Remember the classes we talked about, 18 Buckleys, 11 rudder rows. The captain class were actually Buckley class. They were 46 of them went to the Royal Navy. Also built 17 of the APDs, right from scratch, ex-rudder row. This really was the bread and butter for the shipyard toward the end of the war, were the 95 LSTs that they built. And of course, the first year, the learning curve year, when they learned how to weld and run wire and run pipe, that was with these very simple rudimentary LCI Ls. Okay, well, we saw how many ships Hingham built, and this is the breakout. How many, let's go now back to tin can sailor stuff. How many destroyer escorts were produced? 563 of them were produced.
Wow.
And look at the number of classes. Hingham produced only 2 classes, 2 basic classes, the Buckley and the rudder row. But there were actually 6 basic classes. I've added in the Crossley class APD here. So there are 6 basic classes of destroyer escort, but they were built in 17 different shipyards. Any town that had access to a river, that had access to the sea, was building ships. There was one, we built here, Hingham built 95 LSTs, but there was a company called the Jeffersonville, Indiana, on the Ohio River. They built 127 LSTs. And they would go from the Ohio River to the Mississippi River down to the Gulf, and they finally would go to the Pacific. So right in the middle of Indiana, of all places, they built more LSTs than we did here right alongside the bay. Where did they go? It wasn't just, we all know that the Royal Navy received 32 EVARTs. By the way, we weren't the only ones building Royal Navy. The original EVARTs class, which we didn't build here, Hingham did not build EVARTs. They were originally built on the West Coast, and they actually got the first keel laid a couple days before Hingham did. So that was the Evarts class. But the total, those two classes, Evarts and Buckley, went to the Royal Navy. But the Brazilian Navy received 8 Cannon class ships, and the Cannon class is the same as the Slater, our memorial ship that we support, the USS Slater over in Albany. That's a Cannon class ship. So the Brazilian Navy got 8 of them, the Free French Navy got 6 of them, and the U.S. Coast Guard is our Coast Guard guys. All right, we only have one Coast Guard fellow here today, our good friend Dick. The Coast Guard manned 37 destroyer escorts during the Second World War, so we shouldn't forget that. They were fully integrated with the hunter-killer task groups, and when they manned a ship, they manned it completely, commanding officer down to the mess cook, all Coast Guard. Boy, the war ended rather abruptly, as we know. All of a sudden they're saying, whoa, all these shipyards were at maximum capacity. They were pumping ships out like crazy. The Navy said, all stop. So when the war ended, 193 vessels that had already been contracted to be built at Hingham, including a new class we hadn't built any of these before, landing craft tank. It was not an LST, it was an LCT. 193 were abruptly canceled. And when you abruptly cancel them and you stop work on everything else, what are you going to do with 23,500 employees? Now, some of them met their true love and are now, their descendants are now, and what I'm going to show here, and I'm kind of going to turn it over here to Bob to help me, not turn it over, but to help me really.
Sure.
This is what it looked like. Remember that picture of, and you can see it down here. This is what it looked like during the war, 1944. By the way, these are LSTs in here. If it was earlier in the war, there would be two DEs in each one of these slips. Anyway, this is 1944. Those are the fitting out piers. Those fitting out piers are now the marina. So when you get to Hingham and you see this beautiful marina, that's where the fitting out piers are.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and they've redeveloped it into calling the launch at Hingham Shipyard, and so it now has a combination of retail and residential condominiums. You might have heard of the restaurant Wahlburgers. Its first restaurant was in Hingham Shipyard. So that's sort of the claim to fame, sort of now, sorry to say. But the developers did a good job. They put up a little signage all around and showing what was built and who came and helped design all the shipyard and the ships and stuff like that. So they did a good job there. Yeah.
Let me go. I've got a couple. Let me spin right on through. Okay, so this is, now I'm not sure when, it took a while to redevelop this, but this is the steel mill. Even though this is post-war, we got all $100 million worth of yachts sitting here, this is the original, this is the steel mill that was built in literally months, Each of the pictures that I've shown, this is the power plant that they built. Remember, any shipyard needs obviously electrical, steam, compressed air, all those chipping guns. So that was all built there. That still exists. That chimney's still there, right?
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah.
It's serving a cell phone tower, basically, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know the date of that, but it was sometime after the war, but before today. Because, and you can see, here's another picture of it. There's the power plant and all that. There's one end of that big building. And here it is the same, a picture of the building already demolished. They've taken it down here. I don't know the date of that. But once again, there's the geographical landmark there. And this is about what it looks like today, right?
Right, yeah.
Condominiums, stores, shops.
Yes, and there's also the parking lot for the commuter boat that runs between Boston and Hingham's also there. So sort of a big transportation hub as well as a retail place.
Beautiful. Quite a transformation.
And we're back, and that's what it looked like at its peak. All right, any questions about what you saw today?
Very good.
Bob, if you want to tell us more about your town and what.
Oh, well, yeah, well, I'm here from the Hingham Historical Society. It was founded in 1914. Its first president was actually John D. Long, who was the Secretary of the Navy in the McKinley administration. We have 3 historical properties we manage, the Heritage Museum, the Old Ordinary, which is the 1686 Tavern, and the General Benjamin Lincoln House, where the Revolutionary War general was born and lived. We do have also there, we have lots of collections of shipyard materials. We have a video, for instance, a documentary. It was made maybe 15 years ago, half an hour or so. You're welcome to come in and see. I have some literature here if you're interested, and it talks about what you can find in Hingham and how to find the Historical Society if you'd like to visit. And so I also have some cards here, business cards here, if anyone would like to take any of those as well. Happy to help you. We have, amongst our collection, we have about 200 pictures taken by the Navy during the construction and the ship launching during the World War II. So those are interesting to look at.
Fun to come see.
So feel free to stop by. I'm personally available Tuesday through Saturday afternoons. But like I said, if you want to take a card, I can reach by email or phone anytime. So
Awesome.
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you. I have to admit, I've never been to Hingham, but I'm going to go. How many have been or familiar with Hingham? Okay, there's a number, yeah. Oh, of course, Dave, yeah. And by the way, Dave Sherman, our shipmate here, Dave Sherman, was really helped with this arranging for your visit and all that. Thank you, Dave.
I was born and brought up in Weymouth, but my father's business, which was the ice business, was in Hingham. And I remember Hingham, the Hingham Steel Building especially, because I was 15 years old, and that was government property, so I didn't need a driver's license. I drove every inch of that shipyard without my license.
I love it.
And they're looking for you, by the way. Jerry?
Hingham after the war, they just left.
Yeah.
And the buildings were all derelict, and they had all kinds of different businesses. Plus, they opened up a yacht club because you can see right into Boston Harbor from there. The location was great, and they weren't that far from Bethlehem Steel, maybe 2 miles at the most.
Yeah.
But they were wide open, the place was, I just want to make another comment. During the war, they converted a lot of the 4 stackers, the World War I ships, like the Ward that you see over here, because they had sort of a flat bottom, and they converted them to troop ships so they could land on the beach and debark all the people that were aboard.
Yeah.
So they used a lot of World War I destroyers.
I don't think Hingham did that.
No.
Fall River might have.
No, Hingham didn't, they just built what you just said.
Yeah, yeah.
But they were wide open there right after the war. They just
Yeah.
left the place.
Right. I kind of skimmed over this very important point in the evolution of Hingham. Getting a grip on the anti-submarine warfare problem in the Atlantic, the Battle of the Atlantic, was all important, and that's why Great Britain needed the Lend-Lease. One of their biggest problems, if you remember way back, before my time certainly, Dunkirk. Great Britain, they sent the British Expeditionary Force into France, thinking they're going to hold back the Nazis. They got pushed all the way back. Were evacuated from Dunkirk, 1940, I think, before we were there. That was part of the Lend-Lease question, because Churchill came to us and said, look, we had to leave everything behind. The only thing that we got out of, we got our men. We got our men with whatever they were wearing. They left their pistols, they left their rifles, so they basically left. So they went to the United States, to his buddy FDR, and said, we need basic small arms weapons. And because of the Neutrality Act that we were under, we couldn't directly sell them. So I read an article the other day about this, and that right after Dunkirk, They went throughout the United States to all the armories throughout the United States, and they took 500,000 small arms from World War I. Rifles, pistols, machine guns, small arms. But they couldn't send them to Great Britain because of the Neutrality Act. So U.S. Steel, I'm sure the president got on the line with his buddy U.S. Steel and said, look, you got to take this problem on. So the U.S. government sold for $37 million, they sold over 500,000 small arms to U.S. Steel. And then U.S. Steel immediately turned around for $37 million and sold them, a private company, sold them on to Great Britain. But they couldn't ship them to Great Britain on a U.S. flag ship because of the Neutrality Act. So a British ship had to come in, pick up 500,000 small arms. So we rearmed, after Dunkirk, we rearmed the British Army with all the stuff that we had left over, good stuff, but left over from the First World War.
That's cool.
Yeah. Enfields and Springfields and good old-fashioned 1911s that some of us still have. All right, any question? Good point, though, Jerry, thank you. Yeah, Tony?
Was that town property, before they took the yard over, was that town property of Hingham?
No, it's privately. We had, of course, the two ammunition depots that were in the town were eventually declared surplus by the federal government, and the state took over what was called the Cohasset Annex, which is now Wampatuck State Park, and the Hingham Naval Ammunition Depot was taken over by the town and is now Bear Cove State Park. So those are publicly owned places. But the shipyard itself was bought up by a corporation to develop, and so it's in private hands right now.
So after the war, it reverted back to private property?
Yes, although the Navy, to the consternation of the town, the Navy decided to hold on to the property for at least 10 years after the war. Wouldn't get, well, we might need it. So it prevented the town from going in and developing any of it. So eventually they did in the 50s, and so eventually you saw small, private businesses go in there, before it was redeveloped completely.
The reason why I asked that, because I remember the deal, when I was on the DE, we went up into Monroe Shipyard for some work up there. And Mr. Monroe, I got to meet him personally, and Mr. Monroe said to me that during the war, they took the Chelsea Shipyard from him, Monroe Shipyard.
Yeah.
And then they used it the whole period of the war, and then right after the war, they rebuilt every single thing in that yard before they turned it right back over to him, which was good.
But that was because it was a private yard.
Yeah, it was a private
Right, yeah.
Private yard to be
Yeah, that was the War Production Board, I think it was called, when basically the United States government took over the entire industry of the United States. They just said, do it, and they did it. Henry Ford fought them a little bit, but not a lot.
Hingham
Yeah, Jerry.
was an affluent town, it was a money town. They had beautiful homes, they didn't. There was a money town. You had to have money.
Remember, before that, there was only 8,000.
Yeah, well, they all had money.
Okay, again, you were talking about this, before the war. This is what the property looked like. It was not that property. The Navy owned the ammo depot and the annex, but that property there was privately owned.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they just said, okay, we got it. They just took it. That's what happened to the Jeffersonville Bridge Company, the one in Indiana. When the war started, even though it was a private company, it had been in business, big business from the turn of the century, the U.S. Navy went in there and said, this is now a Navy shipyard. And they said, aye, aye, sir, and they went and built their ships. But having been born in 1944, I don't quite remember the detail. Yes, sir. Lenny.
My deceased wife's brother was, Frank Gifford, was the fire chief at the Hingham Naval Ammunition Depot
Oh, really? Fire chief?
until it closed. And then he went to Machias, Maine, to the Naval Radio Station where they would talk to submarines. He was fire chief there.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a lot of responsibility to be the fire chief in an ammunition depot.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Len. Yeah. Yes, sir.
The Lend Lease program also, once the the Germans turned against the Russians, we supplied the Russians with a lot of Lend-Lease stuff too.
You're right. In fact, good point. Remember, I talked about the number of ships that we, the Lend-Lease ships. We gave however many it was, I forget, the 42, whatever. A couple of them, the Royal Navy took them and lent them, our U.S. Navy destroyer escorts, to the Soviet Navy. There were like 3 or 4 of them that they did. Just so the Brits were lend-leasing later in the war to the Soviet Union too, with our ships that we lent them. By the way, at Lend-Lease, they really, the idea is we instead of saying we sold it to them for diplomatic reason, we had to say we lent them to them. That's what the lend part of it. And the lease is in return for that, the Brits gave us 99-year leases on a number of, they would not trade. Originally, FDR wanted the deed to the property. They wanted to become a U.S. property. And Churchill said, there's no way, just for, so what they agreed on is giving a lease on the property. And Bermuda, and there was a whole series of them. And so that was the lending and the leasing. So what do you do when you lend somebody? Hopefully you get it back. So part of the lend-lease contract was when you no longer have need for these, you will return them. So at the end of the war, by 1946, they were given a period of time when you had to return them. The Brits were sailing these ships back. So all of a sudden, we got a deluge of destroyer escorts, Royal Navy destroyer escorts, that we then we laid them up down in Florida, and then we finally scrapped them. But the Brits had to give them back, or they had to pay for them, and they weren't prepared in 1946 to pay for them. Yeah, it was funny. But one of them, the Brits had done some, they used it as an experimental ship for their own purposes, and they had made a lot of modifications, and they didn't want to give it back. So they brought it back, they turned it back into the U.S. Navy, and the very same day, the Navy sold it to them, because, of course, it's after the war, and you could do that. So they sailed the ship physically all the way back to the United States. They came in, they signed, okay, you've given it back, sign here, okay, now it's yours. And then they had to sail it all the way back. But that's how they kept it.